Hey everyone, Ben the Bar Guy back with another video to help you make better drinks, and today we're gonna go over the 5 drinks you can order from a bartender to see if they know what they're doing at their cocktail bar and whether you should order a cocktail or you should order a shot and a beer instead. Stick with me and let's make better drinks. Hey everyone, Ben the Bar Guy back with another video for you so that you can make better drinks. And today we're gonna do 5 cocktails that stand out as tests to see how good your bartender is in front of you. And before any bartenders out there who are subscribers get mad at me like, why are you throwing us under the bus, Ben? What are you doing, bro? I'm gonna be like, hey, want a way to know if the bartender they're in front of actually knows what they're doing, can actually do things, has the tools. Sometimes it's not even the bartender's fault, as you'll see. They just need to know so they know what to order. They walked into a new bar, they see the dreaded original cocktail list with persimmon tinctures, and they're like, I don't know if this is good or not. Maybe we should just order a classic. Try the classics first. If they do the classics right, maybe their persimmon tincture might be good. But a lot of restaurants just do original cocktails and they only treat cocktail lists like they do their menu. It has to be original, and maybe a chef is behind the menu of cocktails rather than a really good cocktail bartender. So you need a way to discern that, and then you can order what you want. Maybe it's better to order wine there at that place than the persimmon tincture. But if the cocktail bar has someone who's serious behind the cocktail program and really knows what they're doing, you'll be able to order their original cocktails. I would recommend testing them first. So here we go. By the way, this cocktail list goes in ascending order. I start with the drink order that almost any bartender should be able to get at this point. And if not, they should be able to tell you why they can't. This goes in ascending order of difficulty and more knowledge in your cocktail bartenders. Number 1 most important drink that basically every bartender almost anywhere should at least know, if not be able to make, is the old-fashioned, obviously. And you're gonna learn so much about a bartender by ordering the old-fashioned. What are you gonna learn? Well, the first thing is, you're gonna learn if they know about ice. Ice, ladies and gentlemen. Does it come on a big cube or does it not? Right off the bat, you know so much about a cocktail program by whether they pull out a cube that's large for your old-fashioned. And the reason is that an old-fashioned, it just needs a touch of water the way you want it. If you want it a little more watered down, you let the ice cube melt. If you want it a little bit stronger, then you don't let the ice cube melt and you drink it faster. But the key is, do they serve it on a big rock so that you have time to enjoy your cocktail? That's such a big deal. Also, you're gonna know right away if the bartender knows the original cocktail. Pretty straightforward. What do they need to know about the recipe? Well, the cocktail was called the cocktail because it was supposed to perk you up in the morning, just as horse sellers perked up their horses by sticking ginger sticks up their butt to perk their tail up, hence cocking their tail and making them look better to the buyer in the morning. So this cocktail was meant as a way of getting past your hangover, ladies and gentlemen. So in the late 1700s, what we found was that people like to make slings. Slings were just sugar, water, and whatever booze you had, and you might drink those all night and you'd be miserable if you drank them. So what they would do is they'd wake up in the morning and they'd add bitters to their drink. What's that for? Well, bitters at the time were to settle your stomach. And if you drank the same thing you drank the night before, hey, you might actually feel better. Some people, that works. For me, personally, it doesn't really work. Hair of the dog just makes me feel worse. Here's another big thing, the sugar. Are they sugar cubes? Are they sugar dots? Do they use 1 dot or 2? It really doesn't make for a sweet cocktail. In today's taste, you probably need a little more sugar. There's another problem. These don't necessarily dissolve in alcohol. So do they dissolve the sugar cube with a little soda? In which case they're adding water to your drink. I only like water coming from my ice cube melting into my drink because that also gives me lower temperature. But in an old-fashioned's case, it actually makes some sense to maybe just make it 2. Now, if you're like me, I don't want to get drinks returned with that little sugar at the bottom and people don't know what it is and they get mad at you and they say, what is this in the bottom of my glass? And so I switched, when I moved to Washington, D.C. from New York, I switched to simple syrup, which is just half water, half sugar. And I'm adding a little water to the drink, admittedly, but like I said, with the soda adding here, the old-fashioned could use a touch of water. It's not gonna ruin the drink, and temperature isn't as important with an old-fashioned as it is with other drinks. We really kind of want it warm, especially warm on the lips, so we don't use chilled glasses for old-fashions. So isn't that cool? I mean, this is how you learn how much do they know. Now, do they use the sugar and then put an orange peel? Orange peels were the original drink. It would have looked like this. Orange wedges were not. an orange peel would have gone in the drink, and it should be hanging out of the glass like this so that you can pull it out if you want, or maybe it's over the glass. That's great. That will show you a lot about the bartender's attention to detail. Do they give you an option to pull the peel out or have to dip your fingers in to pull it out? Do they muddle a peel into the bottom, or do they muddle something like this into the bottom? That's a little different. We're gonna get to that in just a second. And then what kind of booze do they use? Are they using bourbon or are they using rye? I wouldn't say that using rye is particularly bad, or bourbon. Start to learn what the bar chooses. Do they have a system, or is it just bartender's choice? Before you guys get mad at me out there when you're like, look, the old fashioned is very simple. It's water, bitter, it's sugar, and it's booze. That's it. 4 ingredients, that's it. And none of this nonsense. It's a peel. It's a peel, like, okay, I'm with you. That's how I make my old fashioned. But if a bartender came out and made you an orange muddled in the glass, and then maybe a cherry, does it mean that they don't know what they're doing? Not exactly. Hold your horses on that. Dale DeGroff and his partner Joe Baum were instrumental in bringing back cocktails in the 90s at a bar called the Rainbow Room. It is absolutely quintessential understanding old classic cocktails that you could just read out of books. And when you look up the Old Fashioned in Dale DeGroff's book, the Old Fashioned was created at the Bartenders Club in Louisville, Kentucky. There are 2 warring camps of old fashioned drinkers, those who muddle the fruit and those who don't. I belong to the first camp, as the muddling adds so much flavor. Those other guys just want some sweetened whiskey, not an old fashioned. The 1862 whiskey cobbler, the granddaddy of this, was shaken with 2 pieces of orange in the bar glass. So we have history on the muddling side, and his recipe has 2 orange slices and 2 maraschino cherries. Now, I think Dale DeGroff was onto something. I think when people in the 1860s showed up to a bar and they asked for an old fashioned, they may have been asking for one of 2. Remember that in 1862 in New York, vermouth had hit the scene. Other spirits had hit the scene. Cocktails were exploding. There was lots of things going on. Typically weren't happening prior to 1850 and before. They might have been asking for the original cocktail with sugar, bitters, booze, and water, but they also might have been asking for a cobbler. The cobbler was usually on crushed ice. They may have been asking for a cobbler-like old-fashioned cocktail. 2 of those were very popular. The old-fashioned cocktail was popular in the late 1700s through the 1820s and 30s, but the cobbler became popular in the 1830s to 1860s. And so I think Dale was onto something. I think people who muddle fruit are really an old-fashioned, but like the cobbler version, because they thought that was old and they thought that was the original cocktail. There was confusion on the matter. What is the original cocktail? The cobbler or the old fashioned, which is a bittered sling? I think if someone wants to muddle fruit inside their old fashioned, that's okay. That might actually be a wise bartender, but they should probably have asked you. And they're not making the original old fashioned, so now you know another piece of information about this bartender. Do they treat original cocktail recipes as the thing? Do they ask you what your preference is when you order a classic cocktail? Also, Dale mentions the Bartenders Club. There's been a book about the history of the old fashioned, and it has called into question highly that the Bartenders Club is the source of the old fashioned. And their cocktail menus at the time actually had the bittered sling on their menu, not the old fashioned with muddled cherries and oranges. So it seems that that came along later in lore, and also was blown up by a well-known exaggerator who ran the Bartenders Club. So be careful about saying that the Bartenders Club version must have had orange and cherry in it. That's not necessarily the case, but you learn so much about a bartender by how they make that drink. So that's the #1 cocktail to order to see where your bartenders are at. The #2 drink I like to order to see where bartenders are at along their journey of professionalism and how much they know about their craft is the daiquiri. A simple drink of only 3 ingredients: lime, sugar, and rum. However, there's so much intricacy to the best daiquiri, and any bartender worth their salt understands the intricacy of the daiquiri and how tough it is to make a great one. Here are some of the tricks and things you can look out for when a bartender's making a daiquiri. It starts with the citrus. Is the citrus fresh? Is it juiced a la minute for the drink when you order it? Or has the juice been sitting out? If the juice has been sitting out, what's it sitting out in? Carafes like this that are mostly not full? Are they sitting in huge carafes that may be juice that was from the previous day, or maybe even just 6, 7, 8, 9 hours old? At my bars, I like to not let juice be in a carafe like this for longer than about 6 hours. And I like the neck of my carafes to be a little smaller if possible. But if you're a busier bar and you do need to juice, I would just be happy with no juice from the previous day. That juice is too oxidized. But if you want to juice prior to your service, I do think that can totally produce good cocktails. What's their recipe? Is it scant 1 ounce lime? Some people have some strange recipes for daiquiris. It really should be between a 3/4 ounce pour of lime juice and a scant 1 ounce. It's pretty straightforward. Sugar should be in the form of simple syrup, really. You could, if you want to stick to the original recipe, if someone used powdered sugar on a spoon, you know you're in a place that respects original recipes. That's how they did it at the La Floridita in Havana. These days, perfectly acceptable to do a 3/4 pour of simple syrup made 50-50. Here's another thing. What kind of rum are they using? Aged rum or white rum? Both are perfectly acceptable. The white rum is probably what was made in the original daiquiri, but both will make a great daiquiri. I prefer an aged rum daiquiri, but it's always good to see if your bartender is aware of aged rum, white rum. What kind of rum they use and what proof is very important. Pusser's rum is made in Guyana. Guyanan rum almost exclusively comes from the Demerara distillery. Some are blended, but all are great. But what you really want is a little higher proof. This proof happens to be 42%. 42% is just a touch higher than 80 proof. That really helps. And at Reliable Tavern where I used to work, we used to blend rums in order to get an even higher proof rum. We really want rum to be between 86 and 90 proof if we can. And it makes a difference because it matters to how much water gets melted in your drink. When we start to shake this drink, are we seeing that it gets too watered down? Because a proper daiquiri is not wet. It doesn't taste like rum, it doesn't taste like sugar, it doesn't taste like lime, it tastes like all of those things were balanced perfectly by the right amount of water, about 1.25 ounces, ideally if you're using higher proof rum. More like 3/4 ounce if you're using lower proof rum. That brings up another point. If you're only getting 3/4 ounce of water into your daiquiri, is it cold? Temperature matters. And when you use higher ABV, even if it's just a couple points, you can shake longer without it being over diluted and your drink gets colder. So a cold daiquiri and a balanced daiquiri is essential. 2 ounces of rum is proper. There are some people who pour 1.5 ounces. I can't get behind it. There's not enough alcohol there to balance the ingredients appropriately. Notice, guys, I have not added ice anywhere. This is important. Yet another thing you should look for when you look at your bartenders. Is the bartender building on ice or is he building without ice? Ice last bartending. This is a huge thing because the dilution starts the minute you start measuring a drink over ice. It's like a wick on a bomb. You only have so long before that drink is over diluted and too wet. So you need to make ice come in at the last possible moment. Another really important element of the daiquiri is glassware choice. Are you putting it in a frosted or chilled glass? A really important step. Anyone who's serious about cocktails will be chilling their glassware one way or another. If they have to do it with ice water, I'll forgive them, but they must be chilled. No warm glasses, please. Another really important aspect of finding a good bartender is you listen to them. And I know it sounds weird, but you hear a good bartender before you get any of their drinks. The difference is, do you hear a kind of shake with lots of ice cubes? You hear that? You hear that slush? Do bartenders shake so long that you get that slush? Or do you hear the clunk-a-clunk of a large ice cube? And I'll tell you, the difference is huge, and it has to do with aeration. If you see a bartender with a big ice cube tempering like this, and they start to throw it, doesn't that sound different? And the reason is aeration. If you're shaking a drink with a big ice cube, what you're gonna get is froth. That, ladies and gentlemen, is froth on a daiquiri. It is essential and is one of the ingredients if you make a proper daiquiri. Another thing that's super critical is the daiquiri shaken then strained. There is a huge problem in the industry for bartenders to shake a drink, take the top off, put their strainer on, and then they go start doing things. Maybe they garnish, maybe they get out their glass. What's happening in this tin in that moment is everything. The drink is dying. All of that froth is lost. All of that texture gone. That is a nightmare. So do not ever think of shaking and straining as anything but one thing. When you shake, once you've introduced ice, you shake, then you strain. They are together, they cannot be separate. There is no shake, do something else, then strain. As that drink is sitting there, it's just melting on already shaken ice, which breaks down quicker than fresh ice. And it's just adding water needlessly to your cocktail. So there you have it. A proper daiquiri can be a great way to see where your bartender's at. All right, guys, the number 3 drink that you can use to test your bartenders is the famed martini. Yes, that's right, the king of all cocktails. You can test any bartender's mettle by ordering a martini. Yet again, it is a simple drink of 3, maybe 4 ingredients. But what you have is a very difficult drink to make well for a number of reasons. The martini is a very specific drink made with gin, dry vermouth, maybe orange bitters, served either with olives or with a twist of lemon. Now this drink requires lots of questions. So the first thing you should know when you order a martini is that the next thing out of their mouth, the bartenders, should be, how do you like it? Up or on the rocks or on the rock? I think the way to test the bartender is to ask for it up, by the way. Because what we're trying to get to is, can they make a balanced drink up the way it should taste, maximum chill, cold the way it should be made and should be enjoyed. So I would say up. Then the next question should be, really vodka or gin? Because so many people these days confuse the martini as being a vodka martini, and that's perfectly fine for a guest to show up to your bar and ask for a vodka martini. Very importantly, the martini is not made with vodka. The guests are allowed to say that, but bartenders are not. But you are supposed to ask gin or vodka just to make sure. Now, if they say vodka, very importantly, I don't put in a vodka martini vermouth, and that's because the two don't go well together. At most, if someone wants vermouth and they say they want it with vermouth, I might add ½ ounce tops. But it's a very different recipe to order vodka as a martini. In essence, I'm gonna make a vodka drinker's martini with 2½ ounces of vodka, chilled with as much water as I can take, as cold as possible. And I may not even stir it. I might actually do what we call a steakhouse shake in a shaking tin, just so it gets colder faster. The real martini, the martini people are asking for when they're serious martini drinkers, is always gin. And what kind of gin? Well, I have no problem with people using various gins for their martini. I prefer London Dry Gin. London Dry Gin came from a Dutch king called William of Orange that became King of England, and he brought his Genever to England. And so William of Orange spawned this new style of gin called London Dry. Now, there's a number of London Dry styles that I really like, but Beefeater is usually what I go to. And importantly, all of these tended to be higher proof. Beefeater is 88 proof. This is right in our wheelhouse of ABV that makes a great drink. So we really like 88, anywhere between 86 and 90 is ideal. You will run into higher proof gins that are like 92.4. All of these are good choices. If your bartender goes to them, be happy. But if you go to something like Plymouth, be wary of, you're using a milder gin, which is okay. I have no problem with that, but it's only 82.4 proof. And that will lead to weaker martinis. Important that you get the proof up. They may also go to something like Hendrick's, but if they reach for the Hendrick's first, again, that's a low proof gin. You need something bumped up. You need something a little higher. So also, many of the ingredients flavoring and aromatizing gin are also what aromatize dry vermouth. Now, I've been a fan lately of Gallo. Not only is it completely reasonable in the market, but I just enjoy its subtle nature. It doesn't dominate a drink, particularly the dry vermouth. I also like Dolan, and there are many other dry vermouths that are perfectly acceptable. Dry vermouth in a martini should just balance the drink. So their choice of vermouth can also be a sign of how advanced they are as a bar. If they're using Carpano dry vermouth, I'm impressed. Like, that's a good step. They spend a lot of money on that. They're making less money in profit on the drink to serve you what they think is a better drink. I pay attention to those things. I like that. Gallo, and then the next thing you want to pay attention to is the recipe. I don't know if you guys noticed, but this is a chilled bottle. It was stored in the fridge. A bar should store their vermouth in a fridge or on ice. Maybe not for their shift, but it should be very obvious that they put them away at the end of the night. That's to keep vermouth fresh. Vermouth is a wine. it's fortified, it will last longer than a white wine that's open or a red wine that's open, but not that much longer. Vermouth needs to be respected. Vermouth cannot be served from the back bar on next to Galliano, okay? That's not how it works. Vermouth needs to be stored in a refrigerator. So you're learning a lot about the bar by seeing how they treat the vermouth. I like the recipe to be 2-to-1. That's heavy vermouth, but that would have been the original dry martini. When vermouth hit New York in the 1860s and 1880s, it was a hit. Everybody wanted their cocktails made with it. And typically, martinis, but probably more Manhattans, were made heavily vermouth. We're talking 2 ounces of vermouth to 1 ounce of whiskey. Eventually, in the early 1900s, people started to dry out their Manhattans and their martinis, which this recipe, 2 parts gin to 1 part vermouth, was the original dry martini. So when we make it that way, we are basically saying that we prefer it a little drier. Now, eventually, people like Winston Churchill changed the game when they said, when making a martini, pour the gin, look at the vermouth, and serve. The idea being the vermouth was, at the end of Prohibition, bartenders weren't treating vermouth properly. And I think Winston Churchill, being the drinker he was, probably could tell that the vermouth wasn't taken care of. And if it's not taken care of, it's not worth adding in there. You might as well just drink the gin. But if you get a fresh vermouth and you pair it with gin, it is an exquisite pairing. And that's why the martini is so good when it's made right. And if a bartender nails a martini for you, they're a keeper. Next step, now we have the 2-to-1 added in. Do they reach for orange bitters? Orange bitters or reaching for something like Boker's bitters would be a bartender who knows what they're doing. Because the original martini probably had something like orange bitters added to it. There's probably bitters just to balance. Remember, bittering a drink is really about coalescing flavors. You shouldn't taste the bitters. You shouldn't taste Angostura in an old fashioned. You shouldn't taste orange bitters in a martini. They just bring the ingredients together. It's just a coalescing of flavors. But you know what? The older I got, the more I moved towards using olive juice and olive brine in my martinis. I'm just gonna add 2 little spoonfuls of olive brine. These are questions that your bartender should be asking you. Do you like it with olives? Do you like it with a twist? Do you like it with brine? Do you like it dirty? These are things that they should be saying. A martini order is never just like, yes, sir, on the way. That's not how that works. They should ask you a minimum of 4 questions. Up or down? Gin or vodka? Olives or a twist? Dirty, not dirty? Or it should be implied that they're not going to serve it dirty. It should be very obvious what you're getting. And these bartenders should go out of their way to make sure they're getting you the proper martini. This is a guest who knows what they're drinking's order. And if they nail this, you know you have a bartender worth their salt. Here's another thing, olives. If you order olives, 1 or 3, never 2. Why? Because some people think that 2 is unlucky. You never want somebody to feel unlucky in your bar. Notice, no ice. No ice has been added to this. There's a reason. Ice lasts bartending. Pay attention to whether your bartender adds ice before and starts stirring or after. Now here's one exception. If a bartender is at a cocktail bar where they build rounds, 5 drinks at a time, they may add ice to the drink as they build because they're so fast at making drinks that this actually takes too long for them. And are they pulling ice out of a freezer or are they pulling ice out of an ice bin that's insulated but is allowing the ice to melt? These are very important points. While I say that we do ice last bartending, there are some exceptions at a great bar. So be careful, or maybe ask the bartender why they're adding ice before they start measuring. It's a wick on a bomb and you're lighting the wick. Some bartenders are good enough, you can light the wick early and it's okay. Okay guys, yet another drink that requires a chill glass. Make sure that they're pulling out a chill glass. What ice do they stir on? I happen to be using my home pillow ice out of my freezer from the refrigerator. So these are actually pretty cold cubes and they coming out of the freezer, but you might be wary of a bar using what's called deli ice. That's that dimpled ice that comes out of most big producing ice machines that a lot of bars have. That's fine, but they need to understand that those melt a lot quicker. There's more surface area on those cubes and they're gonna melt very, very quickly. Another thing to look for is how comfortable is the bartender while stirring? Are they stirring quickly or are they stirring lazily? There's no point in stirring unless you're stirring fast. So make sure they look natural, and maybe they can carry on a conversation like this while they're stirring, and then you're in good hands, right? But you want a bartender to stir fast. And here's another thing. As the drink starts to settle, you can see how the ice starts to settle down too. So did they fill up the stirring glass with as much ice as possible to begin with is a big hint as to how they understand how ice melts. The more ice, the better, and the slower ice will melt. In fact, I'm gonna add some more ice to this. Do they add ice during the stirring process to make sure that the drink is getting as cold as possible? Now there's a couple things that might happen while a great bartender is making you a drink. One is an ice cube might actually fall out while they're stirring. That's okay. That's actually not that big a mistake because they're stirring fast with a full glass. It's actually a sign that they kind of know what's important. They're actually maybe doing their job better for you. Another thing is, do the bartender's straw tastes in the glass? Very important because it's such an easy thing to straw taste in the glass to see where the cocktail's at and how much more it needs to be stirred. Another thing to notice is how long do the bartenders stir their drinks? A great bartender probably is stirring a lot longer than you would expect. And the reason is that if they're using really cold ice and really good technique, it takes a while to get the right amount of water in here. And with this 88 proof gin and a boozy drink, you gotta add a lot of water, maybe 1.25 ounces, ounce and a half even, to balance this drink out. It's gonna take a while. So how long do they stir? Here's another thing. If you know that they're making other drinks stirred, are they changing up how long they stir? Do they stir their martinis longer than their Manhattans? And then notice, what's the ABV on their whiskey on their Manhattan that they're using? Is it lower than the gin or higher? And then do they stir shorter on the whiskey drinks and longer on the gin drinks? That's a bartender who understands ABV. And you should stick with that bartender as much as possible. One last little note, how do they handle the way they strain? Is the spoon in the way? Is it always end in the same spot when they stir? I like to set the spoon where my finger can hold it. If I set it like this, with the spoon in front, it's a little harder for me to control the spoon. But if they set the handle of the strainer closer to them, they can control the spoon and the strainer at the same time. A nice little added touch, and you can start to see the professionalism. In addition, when they do peels, are they long and elegant? I like a lemon peel on my olive martini as well. It just makes it taste fresh. Do they strain low and slow, as we call it? What we want is a very smooth product. We want Lake Placid on top of this drink, no bubbles. As tempting as it might be to strain really high like this and make a pretty profile pic, doing that with a stirred drink is a bad idea. We don't want aeration here. We want to taste the viscousness of the alcohol on the drink. When they express the peel, do they aim the peel at the drink and express it and then lay it in a way that you can pull it out if you don't like it? You should always have the option pulling out your peel if you like. What's the wash line look like? Did they make the drink to the appropriate level? To be honest, this might be a little overstirred because I've been running my mouth. Let's see. Once we know wash line, we can determine if I made the proper drink or not. I overstirred this a little touch, but that's a mistake that you won't see a lot of bartenders making. Oftentimes the mistake is they understir their drink, but because I was running my mouth, I overstirred my martini a little bit. Don't worry, it's still drinkable. If you get a bartender who can make you a great martini that looks cold, chilled, proper like this, they're a keeper. Tip them well, come back often. The fourth drink that I would order from a bartender to see how much they know is really getting a little trickier. This really is gonna test the bartender's knowledge of where cocktails come from, and that is the Gin Ricky. If you order a Ricky at a bar, it is a DC drink. In fact, it may be the only drink that DC is known for. It was made at Shoemaker's Bar, and the original version probably was made with whiskey, and it also probably was made without any sugar whatsoever. And that has led to a great debate amongst cocktail drinkers in New York and DC in particular. When the drink was made in the 1800s at Shoemaker's, the drink was made without sugar. It was more like a gin lime highball that could be made with whatever spirit was around. It later started to morph into gin instead instead of whiskey. But importantly, after Prohibition, people stopped using fresh lime juice. And so the only thing on the bar that would work was Rose's lime juice or some sort of lime cordial, which is akin to lime juice mixed with sugar, but probably cooked in some way, and peels are involved, some sort of bitterness. And if anyone's tasted Rose's lime juice, I can assure you that's not delicious. But when people were ordering Ricky's post-World War II, post-Prohibition, they were asking for this lime drink that had no fresh lime juice available. And so what you got was a sweetened Ricky by virtue of the ingredients that were available. Flash forward to 2000 and Milk and Honey opens in New York City, and they start making classic drinks with fresh juice. And what were they using? Simple syrup with lime juice. So a sweetened Ricky. But you should know that the original Ricky was completely dry. And so what you should get from a bartender when you order a Ricky is, would you like it with sugar or the original version that had no sugar whatsoever, which is essentially a highball. Now today, I'll make you the version of the highball that I really like from DC for the purposes of showing you what it's supposed to be in essence. No sugar, okay? So the way I would make it, this is props to all my DC bartenders. We go way back, this is respect. What I would do is I'd make a little wine wheel like this. I would juice it a la minute, and then I would actually add that to the Collins glass, just like so. The bitterness from the peel is a really nice touch on the gin Ricky. At that point, I'd add 1.5 ounces of gin. I find that 2 ounces of gin is just a little too much for this drink, so I like to limit it to 1.5 with the lime juice that's been added. At this point, we use a tall spoon, ideally metal if we can. The lime's at the bottom kind of blocking how much ice we can get in there, but that's okay. Then we're gonna briefly shake the drink. And I say briefly because we really don't want that much water to be added. I don't shake as hard as I do with other drinks as well. We just want a little aeration and froth. And then most of the water we're gonna want to come from the soda. Now there's one caveat to making the drink this way where I didn't add the soda first, and that's that it won't combine. So you really want to make sure that you use the spoon to bring the drink all together and mix everything into one. And then there's a lot of people who will garnish with a little, either the wheel or they'll garnish with the end of the lime. Either way is fine with me. It looks beautiful. And that is actually a classic Ricky. If you get that at any bar that you're going to, you know your bartender really understands their history. But if you get the sweetened version, make sure it has the same recipe as the daiquiri, only with gin, or is the same recipe as a sweet gin gimlet, but just with soda on ice. So you're getting this drink, but with sugar. Either way, this is an advanced test for a bartender who really knows their salt. So keep your eye on the gin Ricky as a test cocktail. All right, guys, the fifth cocktail that you can test your bartender's knowledge with is super advanced. It's almost unfair. I failed this test after multiple years of cocktail bartending, and I'm glad I did because I learned something that day. It's very important, and it has to do with how researched you are. How much did you study your craft? Do you know original cocktails down to their roots and where they come from? The story goes that Sasha Petrovsky walked into my bar one day, and he was my boss. He was a consultant for the place I worked in, and he walked in and said, "I would like a Southside Fizz." Well, if you know anything about fizzes, a fizz classically, as defined as a fizz, would be a soda drink with egg white in a Collins type glass with no ice. It's citrus, sugar, booze, egg white, topped with soda, and it comes over the top of the glass. And these are generally hangover cures traditionally. The Ramos Gin Fizz is the most famous of all the fizzes. A Southside Fizz implies the same method as the Ramos Gin Fizz, only with mint, gin, lime juice, a little simple syrup, and you would do the exact same technique as you would with the Ramos Gin Fizz. Unfortunately, I had not read up on my Harry Craddock that day, because what Sasha was actually asking for was what Harry Craddock called a Southside Fizz. And mysteriously, Harry Craddock called a Southside Fizz, he called a Southside Fizz the juice of half lemon, half tablespoon of sugar, 1 glass of gin, shake well, strain into medium-sized glass, fill with siphoned soda water, and add fresh mint leaves. Now, if you know anything about the South Side, the South Side gimlet is a gimlet with lime, sugar, gin, mint. Mint is the key. That's the South Side. There's also the East Side with mint and cucumber. So you can see a family of gimlets. Now, when you actually say that you want a South Side fizz, what you're saying is you want a South Side gimlet in an egg white drink in a Collins glass with no ice. But the problem is that that's not what Harry Craddock was saying. He was actually making something akin to a South Side Collins, and he was putting it on soda, on ice, in a tall glass. So importantly, earlier in the book, he uses the South Side cocktail to describe a lemon, powdered sugar, fresh mint, and gin cocktail. Shaken well and strained into a medium-sized glass. Add a dash of soda water, if you please. But then a fizz, he says, is the juice of half lemon, sugar, glass of gin. Shake well, strain into a medium-sized glass, and fill with siphoned soda water. Add fresh mint leaves. So one is a muddled drink with a touch of soda water, and one is more of a tall drink. So what you're getting when someone asks who really understands their cocktail history and where they're asking it from, the Southside Fizz technically would be more of a Collins with mint with soda, no egg white. So if you really want to test your bartender and how they're knowledgeable, but you think maybe they're like the best of the best of the best and they know their stuff, this would be a question for them. Order a Southside Fizz. And if you get an egg white drink that's delicious with mint, gin, a little bit of citrus and sugar, be happy. But understand that New York Southsides are gimlets with mint. Understand that Southside Fizzes would be a mint gimlet with egg white served without ice in a Collins glass. Understand that traditionally we don't use lemon like Harry Craddock does for these drinks, but in this one sense, the Southside Fizz could be served with mint, potentially lemon juice or lime juice, sugar, gin as a Collins / Sweet Ricky. If your bartender understands any of this, he should have a lot of questions when you order this drink. A Southside Fizz should be like a red stop sign, warning sign, like Southside Fizz, huh? Do you want the egg white version? Do you want gin? Do you want lemon? Do you want lime? Do you want... They should start asking you 1,000 questions. And if you get 1,000 questions, you know this bartender is an amazing bartender. They know the Savoy cocktail book implicitly. And I failed this test in my day, and now I give it to my bartenders because why not? Let's give them the Mensa test. This is the Mensa test of bartenders. You're supposed to fail, but once you know it, you'll never fail it again. The point is you don't fail it on the second try. So that's it, guys. That is the 5 cocktails you can ask your bartender, from easy to extremely complicated. And if you can get those down, if you can like have a bartender who knows all of those things, or at least close to all of those things, you have a bartender you should tip very well. You should always be friends with them, and you should be going to their bar constantly. And that's it. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you. And as always, give me some comments, likes, whatever you think in the comment section. Give me some comments about what drinks you think test bartenders. What do you think gives you an idea of where your bartender's at, skill-wise, craft-wise, and how good they are. And as always, guys, to better drinks. Cheers.